The cabin had only one bed and the heater broke. My best friend said, "Just get in. I'm freezing." The first thing I noticed wasn't the silence. It was the cold. The kind that crawled through wooden walls, slipped beneath your jacket, and wrapped icy fingers around your heart. By the time I realized the cabin heater had stopped working, snow was already piling against the windows, the roads had disappeared beneath a white blanket, and the only person trapped there with me was the woman I had spent 3 years pretending not to love, my best friend. If stories about kindness, second chances, and the quiet courage of love mean something to you, take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt stories that remind us hope is never truly lost. The trip had been her idea. Every winter, Emma escaped the city for a weekend in the mountains, claiming that silence repaired parts of the soul that noise slowly broke. This year she insisted I come with her after months of watching me bury myself in work following my father's passing. She said I needed fresh air. She said grief didn't belong inside fluorescent office lights. I laughed it off, but eventually I agreed because saying no to Emma had never been easy. We met in college during orientation after I accidentally spilled coffee over both our backpacks. Most people would have exploded in frustration. Emma simply laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. That laugh became the soundtrack of some of the happiest years of my life. We survived exams together, celebrated promotions, helped each other through breakups, birthdays, family emergencies, and countless ordinary Tuesdays that somehow became unforgettable simply because we were together. The problem was simple. Somewhere between friendship and adulthood, my feelings changed. I never told her. She deserved someone fearless. Someone who didn't hesitate. Someone who wasn't carrying enough emotional baggage to fill an airport terminal. I convinced myself staying silent was the mature choice because losing her friendship would hurt far more than hiding my heart. At least that was the lie I repeated every day. The drive to the mountains began under clear skies, but halfway there thick clouds rolled across the horizon. Snow started falling harder than any forecast predicted. Emma kept smiling anyway, singing terribly to old songs while tapping the steering wheel. She always believed every adventure was worth taking, even when the weather disagreed. By sunset we reached the tiny wooden cabin her grandfather had built decades earlier. It stood alone among towering pine trees, surrounded by untouched snow that sparkled beneath fading light. It looked peaceful enough to belong inside a postcard. Neither of us knew the storm was about to trap us there. The electricity flickered twice after dinner before disappearing completely. Emergency lanterns filled the cabin with soft yellow light while the wind outside howled like an angry ocean. We checked the breaker box. Nothing. Then the heater coughed once before dying altogether. At first we laughed. We gathered blankets, lit the fireplace, and joked about surviving like pioneers. Then the firewood ran low. The temperature kept falling. By midnight our breath had become visible. We layered sweaters beneath jackets, wrapped blankets around ourselves, and sat close to the fireplace trying to preserve every bit of warmth. The flames slowly shrank while the storm outside only grew louder. Emma's hands wouldn't stop shaking. I offered her my coat. She refused. I insisted. She accepted with that familiar grateful smile that somehow hurt more than rejection ever could. Around 2 in the morning the fireplace finally surrendered. Only glowing embers remained. The cabin had one bedroom. One bed. Nothing else. We both stared toward the doorway without speaking. Years of careful emotional distance suddenly felt ridiculous compared to the reality of freezing temperatures. Emma looked exhausted. Pale. Her lips had started turning slightly blue from the cold. Then she quietly told me to stop being stubborn, get into bed, because she was freezing too. There wasn't romance in the moment. There was survival. We climbed beneath every blanket we could find, staying awkwardly close because every inch apart allowed more cold to creep between us. For several long minutes neither of us slept. The wind rattled the windows while snow battered the roof. My heartbeat sounded impossibly loud inside the tiny room. Then something unexpected happened. Emma reached for my hand. Not dramatically. Not passionately. Simply because her fingers were ice cold. She whispered that she finally felt warm enough to stop shivering. That tiny gesture broke something inside me. Not because she held my hand. Because it reminded me how deeply we trusted each other. Outside, the storm continued without mercy. Inside, time seemed to pause. The next morning we discovered nearly 4 feet of snow blocking the front door. Our phones had no signal. The car was completely buried. We weren't going anywhere. The emergency food supply contained canned soup, oatmeal, crackers, and bottled water. Enough for several days if we were careful. The first day passed surprisingly well. We shoveled snow away from windows, rationed food, read old books left behind by Emma's grandfather, and played endless card games by lantern light. Without internet or distractions, conversations became deeper than they had been in years. We talked about childhood dreams. About regrets. About parents growing older. About grief. For the first time since my father died, I admitted how guilty I felt for spending so much time working instead of visiting him during his final months. Emma didn't offer clichés. She simply listened. Sometimes listening is the greatest kindness another human being can give. That evening she confessed something I never expected. She admitted she'd almost canceled the trip because she'd recently ended another relationship. Not because he was cruel. Because he constantly made her feel lonely even while standing beside her. She said life was too short to spend with people who never truly saw you. Those words echoed inside me all night. The second day became harder. The cold returned. The last firewood disappeared. Snow still buried every road. We took turns walking laps around the cabin to keep our bodies warm. Our laughter became quieter. Our energy faded. That night, once again, we shared the bed simply to stay warm enough to sleep. This time the silence felt different. Comfortable. Honest. Like two people who had finally stopped pretending everything was simple. Somewhere before dawn Emma asked if I'd ever wondered how different life might have been if we'd met at another time. The question lingered between us like falling snow. I admitted I'd wondered more times than I could count. She smiled sadly. Neither of us said anything else. Morning finally arrived with brilliant sunshine pouring across endless white mountains. The storm had passed, but rescue still seemed far away. We climbed onto the roof hoping to spot another cabin. Instead we saw smoke rising miles away. Someone else was out there. Using every bit of strength we had left, we waved blankets tied to long branches. Nothing happened. Then nearly an hour later we heard it. The distant roar of a snowmobile. I've never been so relieved by any sound in my life. A local ranger had been checking isolated cabins after the storm and noticed our signal. Within hours we were safely back in town drinking hot coffee that somehow tasted better than any expensive cafe could ever produce. Everyone assumed the hardest part of our journey was over. They were wrong. Returning home meant returning to ordinary life. Returning to excuses. Returning to silence. Weeks passed. We slipped back into familiar routines, yet something had undeniably changed. We texted more. Called more. Visited more. Neither of us could forget those nights in the cabin when survival stripped away every unnecessary wall we'd built around our hearts. One evening Emma invited me to the small lakeside park where we'd celebrated our college graduation years earlier. The lake reflected a golden sunset almost identical to that day. She smiled the same smile I'd fallen in love with years before. This time I refused to hide. I told her everything. Not dramatically. Not perfectly. Just honestly. I admitted I'd loved her for years but had been too afraid of losing my best friend to risk telling the truth. For several endless seconds she simply stared at me. Then tears filled her eyes. She confessed she'd spent nearly as long believing I could never possibly feel the same way. Both of us had sacrificed years to fear. Years we could never recover. Yet somehow neither of us felt cheated. Because life had still brought us exactly where we needed to be. Not through grand gestures. Not through impossible coincidences. But through kindness. Patience. Friendship. Trust. And one freezing night inside a tiny mountain cabin where survival demanded honesty more than comfort. We married 2 years later beneath those same mountains. Every winter we returned to the cabin after repairing it together. We installed a brand new heater, insulated every wall, and stacked enough firewood to survive an entire season. Friends always laughed when we insisted on checking the heater first before unpacking. Only we understood why. The old cabin never became a symbol of hardship. It became a reminder. Love rarely arrives with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives disguised as friendship. Sometimes it waits quietly through years of ordinary moments. Sometimes it reveals itself only when the world strips everything else away. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who believes in true friendship, subscribe to the channel, and let us know your thoughts. Your support encourages us to keep sharing stories that remind the world compassion still exists. Before you go, please leave a comment answering this question. Have you ever realized someone's true value only after life placed you in an unexpected situation? We'd love to read your story. Even today, whenever snow begins to fall outside our home, Emma smiles at me from across the room, wraps herself in a blanket, and jokes that broken heaters have surprisingly good timing. I always laugh, but deep inside I know the truth. It was never the cold that changed our lives. It was the warmth we chose to give each other when the world outside became unbearably frozen. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson life ever taught us, that hearts don't find home because everything is easy. They find home because someone stays beside them through the storm, refusing to let them face the cold alone.